we will move on to our first presenter of the day. Is Misty Eland. She is an agricultural inspector for the Sonoma County Department of Agricultural Weights and Measures. And today she is going to be talking about field worker safety inspection overview. Welcome, Misty. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Do you want to share your screen?
Good morning.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh,
there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Can
Okay.
you increase the volume?
Yes. Is that better?
A little bit. It's a little quiet.
Okay. Let me take out the headphones and just talk right in here. All right. Is this better?
Okay. Talk again. Sorry.
Good morning, Cindy.
Okay, there you are. We're good. We're good. Okay. Can we get you to share your screen? I'll stop sharing mine.
Are we good?
No,
Nope.
my screen is still being shared.
Okay.
So, if you go down to new share at the bottom of your screen, and then you can. There you go.
Right, there we go. That's working. Hi, good morning. My name is Misty Eland, and I'm an agricultural inspector for Sonoma County Department of Agriculture. And I work in the pesticide regulation program. And one of the inspection types that we do are field worker safety. And before I start that, I just want to talk about what exactly is a field worker, who counts as a field worker. And it's not your neighbor that chose to walk their dog through your field. They are employees that are performing cultural activities in a treated field for any kind of compensation. That's who's considered a field worker. That could include people working on irrigation, harvesters, people pruning, and agricultural mechanics. Who does not count as a field worker are crop advisors and government officials like me that are performing inspections. The field worker safety inspections that we do are important because they assure that employers are providing sufficient training to the people working in treated fields, the required notification about pesticide applications, the display of required information, and that adequate decontamination facilities are being provided. Oh, hold on. My slides are not advancing. There we go. Okay. So for the presentation today, I'll be giving a brief overview of the field worker inspections, defining terms that are used in regulation related to field workers and their safety, and going over pesticide safety training requirements for field workers and how to fill out the pesticide safety information series, the A9. So the first definition we'll start with is a treated field. I put this definition in first because it's something that is commonly not defined correctly. And it is, treated field is any area where an agricultural commodity is being grown, including forest and nursery products. If they're grown for commercial or research production, and it has been treated with a pesticide or had a restricted entry interval in effect within the last 30 days. It also includes any roads, paths, ditches where you directed that pesticide application. But it does not include areas contaminated by drift. And what's commonly mistaken is property operators thinking that a field is only considered treated if the REI is still in effect, but it's not. It's anything that's been treated in the last 30 days plus the restricted entry interval. So if it's been 30 days since you applied, but there was a 12-hour reentry interval, you have to add on that 12 hours. And that's why when you post your applications, what you apply, the EPA number, it's asking for a start and stop time. And that stop time is what is going to define your treated fields. So the next definition is that reentry interval. It's on the label for the product you used, and it's an established period of time that field workers cannot enter that treated field. It varies depending on what product you used and are established to limit the exposure of pesticide residues to workers or other people not involved in the application of the pesticide. If you use multiple products, the longest REI is the one that counts. In most cases, workers can't enter the treated area if that REI is still in effect, unless they've had extra training to make them early entry workers. And I just want to throw a reminder out there that the REI for your pesticides count, but that adjuvants that you add to the mix are also considered pesticides. So make sure you're counting that REI, and you need to worry about the longest one. Okay, so now we'll get into what the inspection actually looks like when the inspectors show up. They're performed to determine that field worker employers are protecting their workers. And the protection of field workers is mandated by the Federal Worker Protection Standard, and it includes properly training workers, providing required notifications and information about scheduled pesticide applications, and assuring that workers have adequate means of decontamination. When we arrive at a treated field, we introduce ourselves and start gathering information by speaking or interviewing field workers, their foremen, supervisors, property operators. The inspection form, it looks like a checklist, but it really is more than that. As inspectors, we know that this is a rare interaction we have with field workers in our office. We do have relationships with a lot of growers. We see you every year. We see you on multiple inspections, but most field workers, I only get a chance to meet once. So it's our chance to communicate with these workers as much as we can in order to make sure they're being properly trained and equipped in order to do their job safely. So this is what the inspection looks like from our view. It looks like that checklist, but it's really talking points, and these inspections are more conversations with field workers and growers. When we conduct them, we're not just asking yes or no questions, and we let field workers know that we're there to verify their employers are doing their jobs properly and giving them the training and tools necessary for them to be safe. So one of the first things we ask field workers is how they're notified of applications that are going to be taking place around them, and that is current applications. So if they're working in this block, if there's an application going on within a quarter mile of them, they need to be informed that that's happening, and that information needs to include the area that is being treated, the date, time, the start time and the end time, what products being used and the EPA number, and what the reentry interval is. And they need to be given instructions to not enter that area if an application is currently taking place. Who's responsible for giving that notification? It's tricky depending on if they're your employees or if you've hired an FLC to come in and work. But who's ultimately responsible is if there's a pest control business performing the application, they have to give notice to the property operator. And then the operator has to notify field workers of the application, whether they're your employees or they're an FLC employee. If you're the operator, it's your responsibility that those workers know the application's happening. For the required decontamination, the primary purpose is so that field workers have a place to wash their hands and face and for emergency eye flushing. The materials that need to be there are disposable paper towels, so not towels that you launder and reuse. They have to be disposable. You need to have soap, and hand sanitizer does not count. And there needs to be adequate water of a quality and temperature that's going to be safe for them to use. And all of those materials for decontamination need to be together in one place. If you have the water over here and then they have to run 100 yards to get to the soap and paper towels, it's not going to help anybody if they're spread out. Make sure all those items are together. And it does define the water they need to be adequate. And what that means is there needs to be at least 1 gallon of water for every field worker you have at the start of the day. If they're doing those early entry work where there's an REI still in effect, it needs to be 3 gallons of water for every worker. The decontamination, it needs to be no more than 1/4 mile away from the treated field, and it can't be in an area that's under REI unless the workers are in that REI doing early entry work. So this form that you see up here, we call it the A9. It's the Pesticide Safety Information Series, and it informs workers of pesticide use records and where they can obtain medical care. It needs to be filled out completely. There's multiple pages with a couple different blanks that need filled in. And it needs to be posted and filled out prior to field workers entering a treated field. The workers need to be informed by their employer where that A9 is posted. It has to be at the work site in a central location where employees frequently gather. And it needs to be available to employees in a language they understand or be translated into a language they understand. And if you need copies of this, they're on DPR's website. And at the end of the presentation, I'll post a link to that in the chat. It's available to print out in multiple languages. And on the previous slide, it said, when working in a treated field, employers shall display a copy of the completed A9. And DPR actually defines display, and word for word, it is to make information available to the employee so that the employee can readily see and read the document during normal business hours without having to make a specific request of any person. Employees shall not be hindered or impeded from examining documents that are required to be displayed. So this definition is important because it says in here, they can't be hindered or impeded to accessing that A9 or the documents that are required to be displayed. And this is a common thing we see, the A9 is filled out incorrectly because it'll say on the second page where they want to view information about what pesticides have been used or where the SDS are located, it'll say, ask Bob at the office. But if they have to ask someone to see them, that's impeding their access. So it needs to be filled out like literally, where are those documents located? They shouldn't have to ask anyone to view them. Okay. So part of the A9, there's a section that needs filled out for where emergency care can be received if someone is ill. It needs to be filled out with the name, address, and phone number of the nearest medical facility. If you write 911 in this blank, that doesn't meet the requirement. It has to have a medical care facility put in there. Occasionally we'll see crews that work in multiple locations throughout the county, and it is okay to list multiple different hospitals, whatever makes the most sense here. If they're working in Dry Creek Valley, you can have Healdsburg Hospital, Kaiser, that's okay. But it wouldn't make much sense if you have a crew working in Dry Creek and you put Napa's Hospital. That's not the nearest facility where they can receive care. So emergency medical care does need to be planned for in advance. The grower or FLC needs to verify that that medical facility is capable of handling a large group of people who have been exposed to pesticides. And in the case the worst does happen and someone's sick, needs to go to the hospital, be ready to provide copies of the SDS, the product name, the EPA number, the active ingredient for each product the person may have been exposed to, and know the circumstances of how that exposure happened. The next page on that A9 form is the location of the pesticide records and safety data sheets. It needs to be specific. This is another case where you need to put the actual location of those documents and not an ask a person. It's the field worker's right to view these documents and the documents that it leads them to. The safety data sheets and the application specific information. Property operators, it's your responsibility to provide this information to the labor contractor. Then they're responsible for informing their employees. And when we're on these inspections, we try and put ourselves in the field worker's shoes and determine if the description you put on here is good enough for us to find that information too. It's a bit of a scavenger hunt, and if you filled it out right, I won't need to ask anyone where those documents are located. I'll be able to go right to them. There's another blank on this form for the county's ag commissioner's office. That's us. This allows employees to contact and notify our department about dangers in the workplace. They can make anonymous complaints or concern, at which point our department follows up with it. So before workers can work in a treated field, they have to receive specific pesticide safety training in the last 12 months and in a manner they understand from a qualified trainer. So we're going to dig into some of these training requirements. To summarize, before they work in a treated field where an application was made in the last 30 days, field workers must have received this training in a language they understand. I'm sorry, I just repeated myself. We'll go on to the next one. So the person that conducts the training needs to be qualified to do that. And that could be someone with a QAC, a QAL, a private applicator certificate. It could be an ag inspector that holds a valid license in pesticide regulation. Could be someone that completed one of the Train the Trainer programs put on by UC. Or could be a California registered professional forester, someone, California extension advisor. But it does have to be someone that's qualified, and on that training record that you keep, the trainer needs to put their name and what their qualification was to be a trainer. Here is DPR does have a training form that you can use. You don't have to use it. You can keep this written training record in any format you like, but if you take a look at this and follow it, you'll know that you've covered all of the required topics. Oops. Some of the training topics that need to be included is explaining to field workers what a restricted entry interval is. These topics are components of that federal worker protection standard. So they need to know about REIs, posting requirements and application notifications. Regulation requires fields to be posted if the pesticide has an REI longer than 48 hours. They need to know locations where pesticides may be encountered, about routine decontamination, routes of exposure, some of the common signs and symptoms of pesticide illness, the warnings about taking pesticides in their containers home, the location of displayed information, which we'll get to in a few slides. They need to be trained on workers' rights to receive information on pesticides they may have been exposed to, for their doctor or employee representative to receive pesticide exposure information, about their protection from retaliation, and how to report use violations to DPR or the county ag commissioner, how and where they can obtain emergency medical care, and first aid and emergency decontamination procedures. If that sounded like a lot of topics, it's because it is. I think I counted 19 in the regulation of topics that have to be covered. And if you're not sure that you're covering all of them, take a look at that field worker training record form from DPR. There's a link to it, and I'll copy that link in the chat at the end too. Next up is the application specific information display. The operator of the property needs to display this before field workers enter. It has to be displayed, but the employer of the field workers needs to provide a description of the location of where this information is displayed. It needs to include where the pesticide was applied, the start and end time of the application, the date of the application, the pesticide and adjuvant name, active ingredient, and EPA registration number, SDS sheets, and the REI of the pesticide applied. The description of the location of ASID needs to be specific enough for field workers to find it and have unimpeded access. And we talked about that unimpeded access before. It means they shouldn't have to ask anyone where to find it. It can't be displayed in a locked room that they can't get into. It just needs to be up where they can view that information. The location of this information is something that gets filled out on that A9 form, and if you filled it out correctly, it'll be easy for everyone to find, including the inspectors. So if you thought that was a lot of information that you're required to have posted and you're not sure if you got it all, DPR has you covered. There is another form for that. You can follow their form. You don't have to. Again, you can use any format you like as long as all the required information is there. Okay, and we have seen on inspections, there's lots of different ways to display this information. And as long as employees don't have to ask for permission in order to access the records, any way it's displayed is fine. We've seen it in mailboxes and binders and file cabinets, on clipboards and spray boxes. It doesn't matter. As long as you've met all the elements of what's required, it doesn't matter how you get it up there. So all those training requirements that we just talked about are the requirements for field workers. But there's extra requirements if those workers are going to be doing early entry work in a field that still has an REI under effect. Those workers must be told that they're doing early entry work and trained according to regulation. Early entry workers need to be notified that the restricted entry interval is not expired and supplied all the required PPE by their employer and wear it. You have to make sure they're wearing it 4 hours need to have passed, and depending on the activity that's going to be performed, only a certain amount of hours a day is allowed for them to do that work. These requirements can get pretty tricky, so I encourage you, if you're going to have workers doing early entry work, you can give our office a call and we'll go through that product label and regulation requirements and make sure everything is going to be done correctly. So at the end of our inspection, we give our card out to any field workers that we spoke with and their supervisors. Anyone is welcome to call our office with questions they have. Whoever the employer of the field workers are gets a copy of the inspection. Property operators, if you want a copy too, just let us know. We can get you a copy. And one thing I forgot to mention is when we're doing field worker inspections, and these are different from an inspection where we're talking with an applicator, but for field workers, when we interview them, we have to interview them without their supervisor present. And it's good for growers and FLC supervisors to know that before we show up, that we're required to speak with field workers alone without their supervisor present. So we're not trying to be rude to you as a supervisor or an operator. It's what we're required to do. But we will get around to speaking with everyone while we're there. I just don't want anyone to feel worried or concerned or think it's weird that why is she being so secretive about talking with the workers? It's because I'm required to speak to them without you present. So do we have any questions? Cindy, how much time do we have? I can stick around for the next presentation and hang out in the question and answer box.
Okay, so yes, we do have a few minutes for questions.
Okay.
And I will pass it on to Michelle.
Yeah, we do have one question. It says, if employees need to be able to access displayed information without asking permission, do hours of availability matter? And if so, is stored at if it's like stored at an office, are office hours of access sufficient? And if the office is closed during the hours the employees are working, is that a problem? Field workers often start much earlier than office staff.
Sure. The regulation says during normal business hours. So a lot of times the information about what's been sprayed is usually posted out at the field. It doesn't have to be, but it usually is. But it just says during normal business hours. So if those hours don't quite line up with the exact hours where every worker is there, I don't think that's something I'd get terribly picky about.
Got it. Thank you.
And then, yes, Susan, I'm going to post links to the forms.